to limit the amount of time that we here in the legislature can talk about this. That's the purpose of what they're doing. Let's make that very clear. Speaker, they do not want us standing here in the legislature to have put a microscope on this budget and be able to talk about the things, Speaker, that have indeed made life more expensive here in Ontario. Speaker, the tax credits that had helped children and students and seniors and families are being eliminated. In fact, the vast majority of seniors will see the price of their prescription drugs double. 92%, Speaker, 92% of every senior will see their prescription price double. That's just a fact. It's an indisputable fact. Speaker, we also have very serious concerns about anything this government tells us. They have lost all credibility, and I'll go through some of the items why that has happened. So the budget has confirmed now that the government is indeed using one-time money from the sale of hydro as well as contingency funds to make their deficit appear smaller. You know, only a couple of months ago they were bragging that the deficit forecast went from $8.5 billion to $7.5 billion. But if you look at page 100 in the fall economic statement, it tells you how. They used the sale of hydro money. They plunked that into revenue, Speaker. It's one-time money. It's not going to happen again and again and again. So that tells us we have a structural deficit in the province. It means our spending is higher than the money we take in. But if you bring one-time money in to appear to balance off, that solves the dilemma that day, but not the issue that spending is higher than revenue. In a couple of years, Speaker, after this one-time revenue runs out, and of course a couple of years brings us just to the 2018 election, when the one-time revenue will run out, you are going to see an all-out assault on our budget, Speaker. You are going to see a deficit balloon all over again because it's been masked. In fact, the Financial Accountability Officer referred to the Liberal budget as vague and uncertain. And he said that because he went on to say, and I quote, "Maintaining balanced budgets beyond 2017 will likely prove challenging." That is backed up. Well, why, Speaker? Again, they're using one-time money. By that we mean from the sale of an asset, the sale of Hydro One, the sale of LCBO headquarters, and quite possibly, unless we thwarted it yesterday, the sale of 250 LCBO stores, the sale of the OPG headquarters across the street. Those are one-time assets that are going to be sold by this government. Bank of Montreal, BMO Capital Markets, described it this way: asset sales of $5.7 billion are one-time in nature and don't address the underlying structural deficit. Speaker, that kind of sounds familiar. We've been saying that here on this side of the aisle for 2 years, and now we have not only the Financial Accountability Officer coming out and acknowledging that, but we have BMO Capital Markets using almost the exact wording that we have been saying here for 2 years. Further, Speaker, Brian Purchase, now this is Ontario's former chief economist and deputy minister at many ministries. He stated, and I'll quote, "The added revenue from cap and trade and Hydro One sale help make the provincial governments look better." Speaker, everyone understands. We've all seen through this charade now. We understand what they're doing. They're taking one-time sales and propping up their revenue number. This is fake math. It's voodoo math, and it's a shell game with the taxpayers' money. That's the biggest part of what they don't want us standing here talking about, Speaker. That's why they're time allocating this, to get us out of here. Don't let us talk about this budget and what it's doing to families anymore. So let me take a few minutes, Speaker, and tell you what it's doing to families, because life is getting more expensive for the people of Ontario thanks to this 2016 budget. Of course, you've got the obligatory sin taxes, Speaker, taxes on alcohol and tobacco. They're going up. Wine prices will increase by 4%, and there'll be a minimum price put on alcoholic ciders. But the government talks about this increased availability of wine, but, Speaker, their plan won't be fully implemented for 9 years, except the price goes up today.
Money.
When we talk about cap and trade, that's something they really don't want to hear. I want to stop for a moment and commend our member from Huron-Bruce, who has done an exceptional job on this cap and trade file. She has shown us exactly what is going to happen to the pocketbooks of those in Ontario and what won't be happening to the greenhouse gas emissions, thanks to this liberal design of cap and trade. So I thank you very, very much. Look, climate change is a very serious challenge. Nobody's going to argue that. But the government needs a credible plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But you've also got to protect taxpayers and our economy. So what we've seen now is this government is taking advantage. They're preying on the goodwill the people of Ontario have towards climate change. We want to see something done. This government is preying on that goodwill and using it as a tax grab. We've seen that from all of the financial services who have said, this cap and trade, this is one time. Now, you would have heard the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change stand up and say, no, it's protected by law. That money must go into X projects. Well, if you look at the projects, and it's interesting, they did exactly the same thing with the Hydro One. They told us that the money had to go specifically into transit and infrastructure. And ostensibly it did, Speaker. It went into transit and infrastructure, but that money was already budgeted. So they took the already budgeted money out of the bottom end of that and used it to lower their deficit. So the transit and infrastructure fund did not change. With that influx of money from Hydro One, it didn't change the amount they spent. They just took that money and used it to artificially lower their deficit. Now, they're doing exactly the same thing with the cap and trade money.
Financial chicanery.
They talk about how it must be used for the various projects. Transit is one of them. So here we go again. They're going to put that cap and trade money. Now, we're talking big money here, Speaker. This is $1.9 billion annually. We're talking about putting that money, yes, into transit. They'll tie a green ribbon around every project you can imagine and say this was thanks to the cap and trade money. But all that money that was already budgeted, they'll be carving that out the bottom and stuffing it into the deficit. That's exactly how they plan to lower the deficit, and it's all imaginary, Speaker. There's nothing new to be done about climate change with their budget. It's a shame and it's a sham. I want that very, very clear. So this $1.9 billion will raise the price of gasoline 4.3 cents a litre, and that's before tax, of course. That's about, you'll be paying about $400 a year, Speaker, in new gasoline taxes at the pump. Natural gas, the experts tell us that in only a few years from now, Speaker, this will add about $475 to the average family's natural gas bill once this program is up and running, Speaker. This is already on top of the skyrocketing hydro bills that families we all hear from just cannot afford to pay. You're right, it's about a $1,000 hit just on those items alone from cap and trade. Speaker, the Premier before the budget said, oh, great news coming in the budget, we're going to help you lower your hydro bills. Speaker, it was insulting to read just about the only line in that almost 400-page budget, the only line about the seniors and families who cannot afford their hydro bills, the only line was, we've got something for you from Cap and Trade. We're going to give you $2 a month off your hydro bill. Well, thank you very much. Considering in January alone, your hydro bill went up $100, so thanks for the toonie, but you're not solving the problem. There are families in Ontario, and these members here on the Liberal side were with us as we sat in the pre-budget hearing in Ottawa last year, and we heard from Jennifer, who said she has to decide, because her hydro bill is so high, she has to decide whether to heat or eat. That is the Ontario that this Liberal Party has created, Speaker. That is the Ontario that is seeing all aspects deteriorating, from businesses to the families who cannot afford to pay their bills, Speaker. This budget is an assault on families, students and seniors, and children. Here's an example. Seniors' drug costs. If you're one of the, according to Kathleen Wynne, a wealthy senior who earns more than $19,300, if you're that wealthy, you can afford now to have the cost of your drugs double. Speaker, the ODB, the drug benefit, will go from $100 to $170, and every prescription they get, they have to pay an additional $1. That's double, Speaker. That's the assault that this government is putting on seniors. And if you participated in the home renovation tax credit, if you needed a wheelchair ramp, if you needed other things to help you in your home, well, that's all gone now. They didn't mention that in that budget speech, Speaker. The budget speech was all aspiration, but no operation. Right. This is what's happening on the ground, Speaker. Families are struggling. If you have kids, you would have used the children's activity tax credit. That's to help your kids with soccer and hockey and all of the sports and activities. There was a great tax credit, Speaker, that's gone today. This is an assault on children and their parents. This is an assault on students, an assault on seniors. It's an assault on families. If you wanted to enjoy hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, decided to get a liquor license, an event permit, a court application, every single one of those, speakers, despite what we've heard from the Minister of Natural Resources over and over, where he continues to either not understand his file or never to have read the budget. At page 190 and page 191 are very clear, Speaker. They tell us that service fees are going up, and they list all the fees, including hunting and fishing licenses and parks. Speaker, it's very clear, and this minister and this government keeps denying that that occurred. Speaker, page 190 and 191 appeared in my budget. I don't know why they can't see it in their budget. It's something really wrong, Speaker, when the government not only does this to the taxpayers of Ontario, puts this punitive financial strain on them, but then denies it as well. That's more heinous, Speaker. I want to have some fun with numbers. I like numbers, Speaker. I enjoy that. Again, I've said earlier, we have a structural deficit in Ontario, and it's masked by all of these one-time supplements. But the government's revenue projections for 2017-18 are $4 billion higher than the Financial Accountability Officer's best-case scenario for Ontario. In the fall, he came out with a report, and he said, look, if all of our revenues magically hit this number here, and our expenses magically are reduced to this number here, we're still going to have a deficit of $3.5 billion in 2017-18. That's what he told this legislature. Yet somehow this government has propped up their revenues and made that deficit appear that it's going to disappear. Now, I trust the Financial Accountability Officer and his staff. I trust their numbers. They've got a book that they put out that shows how they got to that. Best case scenario says we cannot balance. If everything goes perfectly, we cannot balance. Those are his numbers. Yet the government's numbers, of course, when you just pluck numbers from thin air and you pluck in these revenue numbers that they've made up, Speaker, that's the problem. They've used these one-time revenues. So a couple of other things the government did this year to reduce their deficit, to artificially reduce their deficit. They removed $850 million from the contingency fund. Well, that's always a great way to appear to balance.
Not good.
They applied, this was my favorite, because just think about it, Speaker, only in the fall the government came out with a budget. Remember I said earlier they dropped their deficit from $8.5 billion forecast to $7.5 billion. Well, magically, only a couple of months later, they came in at $5.7 billion and patted themselves on the back. What they failed to tell all of the people of Ontario is they took a one-time, it's called a departure tax, that Hydro had to pay. And it's a tax in lieu, it's a grant or a payment in lieu of taxes. In the municipal world, former Mayor of Brockville and I we would have called that PILT. Payment in lieu of taxes. So they had to come up with a payment because they're no longer going to be a tax-free government-owned agency. They're going to be an independent corporation. They had to pay $2.6 billion. Well, that's a one-time fee. They're never going to get that tomorrow, the next year, the year after that. They took $2.6 billion, dropped it into their revenue, into one-time revenue, Speaker, which magically lowered their deficit forecast from $7.5 billion down to $5.7 billion. That is unbelievable, Speaker, that they would do that, that they would artificially reduce their deficit. That didn't lower the spending. The deficit's still there. It's just artificially masked by this one-time payment. And of course, they also used, to get from 8.5 to 7.5, the one-time payment of the Hydro One sale. But Speaker, the government says they're on track to balance again, but here's some of the little things, again, they forgot to tell you what they've included in the budget. They included crossing their fingers and maybe their toes. They're planning on getting an extra $1.8 billion from the federal government. That's how they plan on balancing. Next year, they're going to carve out $1.9 billion more in personal income tax.
Wow.
You know, I didn't hear the finance minister tell us, by the way, I'm raising your taxes. He didn't tell us that in his budget. But it's $1.9 billion in new income tax. It's in their budget, Speaker. If you get into the past the aspirational stuff and get into the real facts,
past the stretch goals,
you can see where it is. They're also forecasting $500 million in sales tax increases. They're forecasting $700 million in corporate income tax revenue. And of course, a further $500 million than their original forecast from the cap and trade. I almost said the same thing as the Premier. Caught myself there. The debt, Speaker, is projected to be $308 billion this year. Speaker, that's up from $296.1 billion. We are going to add $12 billion to our debt. Speaker, that means we are the largest subnational debtor in the entire planet, Speaker. That's what we're number one in.
So shameful.
Member from Parry Sound and I, we're both a couple of northern guys, and we like to remember back to the good old days when we were number one, Speaker. We were number one mining jurisdiction in the world. Today we've fallen to number 23. Well, they've replaced it by being the number one debtor in all the world, Speaker. That's quite an accomplishment. Debt is going to continue to grow. This budget projects debt will grow by $40 billion by 2018-19. $40 billion more dollars of debt, Speaker, will be added. Speaker, I could go on and on and on, but I think you get the spirit of what I'm speaking about, Speaker, that this government doesn't want us here talking about this budget, and that's why they are time allocating this. Thank you, Speaker.